The ship belonging to Ambassador Kethira dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a small yellow star system, and she felt the familiar hum of the engines settling into a quieter rhythm as they approached the third planet from the sun. She had read the reports about this world many times during her journey, and none of them had impressed her in any meaningful way. Earth, the natives called it, a name that simply meant dirt or soil in their most common language. And Kethira found this lack of imagination to be telling her people. The Valorians had named their homeworld the Eternal Throne of Stars because they understood that names carried power and meaning. These humans apparently did not share that understanding. The Galactic Concord had catalogued Earth nearly 300 standard years ago when a primitive probe from the planet had drifted into a shipping lane and caused minor confusion among freighter captains. Since then, the Concord scholars had observed the species with casual interest, noting their development of nuclear power, their first tentative steps into space, and their eventual colonization of nearby planets and moons. None of it had been remarkable. The Valorians had achieved faster than light travel within 2 centuries of discovering electricity, and the Radhani had done it even faster. Humans had taken nearly 400 years to reach the same milestone, and even then, they seemed content to putter around their own solar system, rather than reaching for the wider galaxy of Eris. Briefing documents described them as a Va plateau species, a term the Concord used for civilizations that reached a certain level of development and then simply stopped advancing. It happened sometimes, the scholar said, when a species became too comfortable or too afraid to push further into the unknown. The ambassador stretched her forearms and checked her appearance in the polished metal wall of her cabin. Her scales gleamed a healthy shade of deep purple, and the ceremonial gold bands around her upper arms signified her rank and authority. She had been chosen for this mission because it was considered unimportant, a simple matter of establishing formal relations with a minor species that posed no threat and offered little value. It was the kind of assignment given to ambassadors who had fallen out of favor with the hegemony's ruling council. Kethira knew she was being punished for her failure to secure a trade agreement with the Mandari Collective the previous year, and she accepted this assignment with what dignity she could manage. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and she watched through the viewport as clouds parted to reveal a world of blue oceans and green continents. It was pretty enough, she supposed, in the way that many garden worlds were pretty. Nothing special. The humans had arranged for her to meet their representative at a facility they called the Geneva Diplomatic Center, a modest building of glass and stone that sat beside a large lake surrounded by mountains. Kethira had seen the grand halls of the Concord's capital world, where buildings stretched kilometers into the sky, and entire ecosystems existed within single structures. This place looked like something a moderately successful merchant might build as a vacation home. A small group of humans waited for her on the landing pad, and she studied them as her shuttle touched down. They were soft-looking creatures with only 2 arms and 2 legs, their bodies covered in cloth rather than natural armor or scales. Their leader appeared to be an elderly female with white hair and a face marked by the lines of a Kethira felt a moment of confusion at this, because most advanced species had long since eliminated the visible effects of aging, and she wondered if humans simply lacked the technology or if they chose to grow old for some reason she could not understand. The elderly woman stepped forward as Kethira descended from her shuttle, and she smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Ambassador Kethira," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I am Dr. Sarah Chun, and I have been appointed to represent Earth in these discussions, and I welcome you to our world." Kethira performed the formal Valorian greeting, crossing her upper arms over her chest while extending her lower arms outward in a gesture of peaceful intent. I bring greetings from the Galactic Concord and the Valorian Hegemony, she said. And I am authorized to discuss the terms of Earth's incorporation into the greater galactic community. Dr. Chun's smile did not waver, but something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker of something that Keth-Era could not quite identify. That is very kind of you, the human said. But I think perhaps there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of these talks. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything Keth-Era had experienced in her long career. She presented the standard terms for a developing species joining the Concord: limited autonomy, tribute payments, access to advanced technology in exchange for resources and military support. Dr. Chen listened politely to each proposal and then declined with a gentle shake of her head. We appreciate the offer, she said, but we prefer to remain independent at this time. Keth-Era tried different approaches, emphasizing the dangers of remaining outside the Concord's protection, the economic benefits of membership, the cultural exchange that would enrich human civilization. Dr. Chun responded to each argument with patient counterarguments that somehow made Keth-Era feel like a child trying to explain something obvious to a patient teacher. What do you want? Keth-Era finally asked, her frustration breaking through her diplomatic training. Dr. Chen folded her hands on the table and looked at the ambassador with an expression of infinite patience. We want to watch, she said. And we want to wait. Watch what? Keth-Era demanded. Wait for what? That is something we cannot explain, Dr. Chun replied. Not because we wish to keep secrets, but because the explanation would not make sense to you yet. And perhaps one day it will, and we hope that day comes soon. Keth-Era left Earth 3 days later with nothing to show for her mission. Except confusion and a growing sense of unease, she filed her report with the Concord's administrative office. Noting that the humans had refused all offers of membership and seemed uninterested in galactic affairs, she also noted something that bothered her more than she could explain. Throughout all their discussions, Dr. Chun had never once seemed impressed or intimidated by anything Keth-Era showed her. Not the holographic displays of Concord military might, not the statistics about thousands of member worlds, not the promises of technology that could extend human lifespans by centuries. The old woman had looked at all of it with the calm acceptance of someone who had seen such things before, many times, and had long since stopped finding them remarkable. Fear included this observation in her report, but she did not know what to make of it. Neither did anyone else. The report was filed away and forgotten, and the galaxy continued to turn, and Earth remained a small and quiet world that no one thought about very much. This would prove to be a mistake. 60 years had passed since Ambassador Keth-Era visited Earth, and the galaxy had changed in ways both large and small during that time. The Valorian Hegemony had fought 2 border wars with the Mandari Collective, and both conflicts had ended in stalemates that left millions dead and countless worlds scarred. The Ridhani had discovered a new form of energy production that made them wealthy beyond measure, and they used that wealth to buy influence within the Concord's ruling council. New species had been discovered and brought into the fold, some willingly and some through force. And the great machine of galactic civilization continued to grind forward as it always had. No one paid much attention to Earth during these years. The humans continued to build their quiet settlements throughout their solar system, and occasionally a Concord ship would pass through and note that nothing of interest had changed. They were still a plateau species, the report said, still content with their small corner of the universe, still refusing all offers to join the greater community of sentient life. Then came the discovery that would shake everything. A mining company operating in the outer reaches of Concord space had purchased the rights to a dead world called Verthax Prime, a barren rock that surveys indicated might contain valuable deposits of rare minerals. The miners dug deep into the planet's crust, And what they found there was not minerals, but something far more valuable and far more terrifying: ruins, massive structures buried beneath billions of years of sediment. Preserved by some technology that defied all known science, the buildings were made from materials that Concord scientists could not identify, constructed using methods that seemed impossible, and covered in writing that no translator could decipher. Initial estimates placed the age of the ruins at approximately 3 billion years, a number so large that many researchers refused to believe it at first. 3 billion years ago, the galaxy had been young and mostly empty. Life had barely begun to emerge on a handful of worlds. The idea that an advanced civilization could have existed at that time challenged everything the Concord believed about history and the development of intelligent species, but the evidence was undeniable. And soon the name Elder Civilization began to spread through academic circles and then into popular culture. Other sites were discovered as researchers went back through old survey data with new eyes. Elder ruins existed on dozens of worlds, buried deep and hidden well, but unmistakably present once you knew what to look for. The pattern that emerged from these discoveries was almost too large to comprehend. The Elder Civilization had not been a single species confined to a single region of space. They had ruled the entire galaxy, building structures on worlds separated by thousands of light years, traveling between stars with technology that made current hyperspace drives look like children's toys. And then they had vanished. No bodies were ever found in the ruins. No personal artifacts or records that might explain who they were or where they had gone. They had simply disappeared, leaving behind only their empty buildings and the faintest traces of their genetic experiments, because the elders had not merely built structures. They had created life analysis of genetic samples from hundreds of species across the galaxy revealed a common foundation, a shared set of building blocks that could not have emerged independently through natural evolution. The Elder Civilization had seeded the galaxy with the raw materials for sentient life, had shaped the conditions that would allow intelligence to emerge, and had done so with a precision that suggested billions of years of planning. Every species in the Concord was, in some sense, a descendant of the Elders. This revelation sparked chaos throughout galactic civilization. The Valorians pointed to 6-fingered handprints found in some Elder sites and claimed that their own 6-fingered hands proved they were the Elders' chosen successors. The Rethani noted that their homeworld sat at the intersection of what appeared to be Elder transit routes and argued that this made them the legitimate inheritors of Elder authority. A dozen other species made similar claims, each finding some small piece of evidence that supported their position and ignoring everything that contradicted it. The Galactic Concord, which had maintained peace through careful diplomacy and balanced power for thousands of years, began to fracture along these new fault lines. Wars broke out between species that had been allies for centuries, each fighting to prove their connection to the vanished Elder Civilization. It was during this time of chaos that a young Rethani researcher named Sorel made a discovery that would change everything. Sorel was not a famous scientist or a powerful politician. She was a junior genetic analyst working in a small laboratory on a minor research station, assigned the tedious task of cataloging genetic samples from newly contacted species. Her supervisor had given her the job because it was boring and time-consuming, and because he did not like her. Sorel did not mind. She found comfort in the methodical work of comparing genetic sequences, searching for the markers that researchers had identified as signs of Elder engineering. Most species showed these markers to some degree, usually in the range of 15 to 40% alignment with the Elder template. One day, Sorel received a batch of samples from a species that had been cataloged but never thoroughly analyzed. The samples came from Earth. Sorel ran her standard analysis protocols and then stared at the results in confusion. Alignment was 99.97%. She checked her equipment for errors, cleaned her instruments, and ran the analysis again. The same results. She used a different methodology, borrowed samples from other laboratories, and repeated the process 14 times over the course of 3 weeks. Every test returned the same answer. Human DNA was almost perfectly aligned with the elder genetic template, far more closely than any other species in the galaxy. Sorel understood immediately what this meant, and she understood that this information was dangerous. She tried to contact her supervisors, but they were busy with more important matters. She tried to file an official report, but the bureaucratic channels were clogged with claims and counterclaims about elder heritage. In desperation, she posted her findings to a public scientific database, hoping that someone with more authority would see them and take appropriate action within hours. Her discovery had spread across the galaxy within days. The first ships were arriving at Earth's solar system, demanding answers. The quiet planet was quiet no more. The fleet that gathered at the edge of Earth's solar system was the largest assembly of ships in recorded galactic history. Thousands of vessels from dozens of species hung in the darkness between stars, their weapons charged and their crews uncertain about what they would find. Ambassador HFY stood on the bridge of the Valorian flagship and watched the distant blue dot that was Earth with a mixture of fear and something close to anger. She had warned them 60 years ago. She had filed a report noting that something was strange about the humans, that they seemed too calm and too knowing for a supposedly primitive species. No one had listened, and now the galaxy was on the edge of a war that might destroy everything. The humans had not responded to the initial demands for explanation that the gathered species had transmitted toward Earth. They had not fired upon the approaching fleet or attempted to flee. They had simply invited all interested parties to send representatives to a meeting on Mars, in a great hall built inside a mountain called Olympus. Mons HFY was chosen as one of the Valorian delegates, and she suspected this was because the ruling council still blamed her for failing to bring Earth into the Concord all those years ago. If the meeting went badly, she would make a convenient sacrifice. The hall inside Olympus Mons was enormous, carved from the red stone of Mars and lit by soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species filled the chamber, their voices creating a constant rumble of conversation in dozens of languages. At the front of the hall stood a simple raised platform with a single chair, and sitting in that chair was Dr. Sarah Chen. HFY felt her scales prickle with shock when she saw the human woman. 60 years had passed since their first meeting, and Dr. Chen looked exactly the same as she had then. An elderly woman with white hair and a face marked by the lines of age, but 60 years should have killed her. Humans did not live that long. According to all the data the Concord had collected, the old woman rose from her chair and the hall fell silent with a suddenness that surprised everyone. There was something in her presence now that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and HFY had simply failed to recognize it. Authority, power, the weight of ages pressing down upon the room. "You have come seeking answers," Dr. Chen said, and her voice carried clearly to every corner of the vast chamber without any apparent amplification. "And I will give them to you, though I suspect you will find them difficult to accept," a Mandari delegate shouted from somewhere in the crowd, demanding to know if humans were truly descended from the elder civilization. Dr. Chen smiled, and there was something ancient and sad in that expression. "You have been asking the wrong questions," she said. You assume that the elders disappeared and left behind only their ruins and their genetic experiments. And you have spent these past months fighting over which of you has the strongest claim to their legacy. She paused and looked out over the assembled delegates with eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. The elders did not disappear, she said. We simply chose to rest. The silence that followed was absolute. Ekathra felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet, leaving her floating in an endless void. 3 billion years ago, Dr. Chun continued, my people had spread across this galaxy and beyond, building wonders that you cannot imagine and solving problems that you do not yet know exist. And we were dying. She held up her hand to stop the questions that were forming on 1,000 lips. Not dying physically, she said, but dying in spirit because we had learned a terrible truth about immortal species. A truth that you will one day learn for yourselves if you survive long enough. She stepped down from the platform and began to walk among the delegates, her small human form somehow commanding the attention of every being in the room. When you live forever, she said, when you have seen everything and done everything and learned everything, you begin to lose the ability to feel wonder. And without wonder, existence becomes empty. A mechanical process of continued survival without meaning or purpose. She stopped beside a young Rathani delegate who looked as though he wanted to flee. We could have continued as we were, Dr. Chun said, ruling the galaxy for another billion years, maintaining our civilization through habit and inertia, but that is not living. That is merely existing. She turned to address the entire assembly once more. So we made a choice, she said. The hardest choice any species has ever made, and we decided to begin again. Dr. Chun explained what had happened 3 billion years ago. Elder civilization had spent millions of years preparing for their great project. They seeded the galaxy with the building blocks of life, creating the conditions that would eventually give rise to new intelligent species. They built hidden archives of their knowledge, encoded in the structure of space itself, waiting to be discovered when the time was right. And then they did something that no other species in history had ever done. They chose to forget. We returned to our homeworld, Dr. Chun said, and we used our technology to suppress our memories, to lock away our knowledge, to become children again. And we let evolution reshape us over billions of years until we had forgotten who we were. She smiled. And this time there was joy in her expression. Earth was never our cradle, she said. It was our nursery, the place where we could grow up again, where we could rediscover the wonder of learning and creating and exploring. Kathira found her voice at last. Why? She asked, and her voice cracked with the weight of the question. Dr. Chun looked at her with something like affection. Because we wanted to remember what it felt like to be young, she said. To look up at the stars and feel small. To face challenges we were not certain we could overcome. To discover truths that surprised us. She gestured at the assembled delegates. And because we wanted children, she said, not servants or subjects, but true children who would grow and learn and eventually surpass us. You created us, whispered a Valorian delegate. All of us. We gave you the gift of existence, Dr. Chun agreed. And then we stepped back and let you find your own paths, and we have been watching you ever since, hoping that you would become something wonderful. And have we? Kathira asked. Dr. Chun looked at the gathered representatives of 100 warring species, at the fear and anger and confusion on their faces, at the weapons their ships carried and the hatreds they nursed in their hearts. Not yet, she said softly, but we have not given up hope. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. And nothing was ever the same again in the weeks following Dr. Chun's revelation. The wars that had been fought over elder heritage simply stopped. What was the point of claiming to be the elders, chosen successors when the elders themselves had returned, Some species reacted with fear, pulling their fleets back to their home systems and preparing for an invasion that never came. Others sent endless delegations to Earth, begging for technology or protection or simply for acknowledgement that they mattered in the grand scheme of things. The humans received all of these visitors with the same patient calm they had always shown, and they gave the same answer to every request. "We will not rule you," they said. "We will not give you our technology or fight your wars or solve your problems for you, because that would defeat the purpose of everything we have done." It was Ambassador Kathira who finally understood what this meant. She had remained on Mars after the Great Assembly, unable to return to a hegemony that no longer seemed to matter. And she spent her days walking through the gardens that humans had built in the shadow of Olympus Mons. One morning, she found Dr. Chun sitting on a bench beside a small pond filled with fish from Earth. "You could end all the suffering," Kathira said, sitting down beside the ancient being who wore the shape of an old woman. "You have technology that could cure every disease and feed every hungry mouth and stop every war." "Yes," Dr. Chun agreed. "Then why do you not use it?" Dr. Chun picked up a small stone and tossed it into the pond, watching the ripples spread outward. "When I was truly young," she said, "before the first awakening, before I remembered what I was, I had a daughter." Kathira remained silent, sensing that this was important. "She was learning to walk," Dr. Chun continued, "and she kept falling down, and every time she fell she would cry, and it broke my heart to see her struggle." The old woman smiled at the memory. "I could have carried her everywhere," she said. "I could have built machines to move her from place to place without any effort on her part, and she would never have fallen again, but she would never have learned to walk," Kathira said softly. "She would never have learned to walk," Dr. Chun agreed. "And more than that, she would never have known the joy of taking her first steps on her own. That moment of triumph, when she finally understood that she could do this thing that had seemed impossible." She turned to look at Kathira with eyes that held billions of years of love and sorrow. "Struggle is not punishment," she said. "It is the gift we give to those we love, the chance to become more than they were." In the months that followed, something strange began to happen among the humans across Earth and throughout the solar system. Individuals started to remember. A farmer in a region called Mongolia woke one morning with knowledge of quantum mechanics that no human school had ever taught. A teacher in a place called Brazil found herself dreaming of ships that travel between galaxies. And when she woke, she could draw their designs with perfect accuracy. A child in a cold northern land called Norway began speaking in languages that had not been heard for 3 billion years. The awakening was not universal. Most humans showed no sign of recovered memories, and they continued their lives as they always had, tending their gardens and raising their families and looking up at the stars with the wonder of children seeing the universe for the first time. But those who did remember became something new, bridges between the ancient past and the uncertain future. Ihara witnessed one of these awakenings when she visited a human settlement on Europa, one of the moons of the gas giant called Jupiter. A young man named Thomas had been working as a maintenance technician, repairing the systems that kept the settlement's inhabitants alive in the hostile environment. One day, he simply stopped what he was doing and stood very still for a long time. When his co-workers approached him to ask if something was wrong, he looked at them with eyes that had changed, eyes that held depths they could not fathom. "I remember," he said. And then he walked away. Kathira followed him. She found Thomas standing at a viewport, staring out at the swirling clouds of Jupiter. "Does it hurt?" she asked, remembering. Thomas considered the question for a long moment. "It is like waking from a dream," he said, and realizing that the dream was also real. That you are both the person who dreamed and the person in the dream. He turned to face her, and she saw that he was crying. I remember building the first stars, he said. I remember watching the galaxy take shape over billions of years. I remember the faces of beings who died before your species learned to walk upright. Do you regret it? Kathira asked, giving all of that up to become something small and mortal? Thomas laughed, and there was genuine joy in the sound. I have a sister, he said. Her name is Emma, and she is 7 years old. And yesterday, she showed me a picture she drew of our family. He pulled out a small piece of paper covered in childish scribbles that vaguely resembled human figures. I have lived for longer than you can comprehend, he said, and I have seen wonders that would shatter your mind. And I tell you truly that this drawing is worth more to me than all of it. He looked back at the viewport, at the endless universe beyond. We did not forget because we were tired of being powerful, he said. We forgot because we had forgotten how to love the small things, the simple things, the precious brief moments that make existence worthwhile. Kathira stayed on Europa for many more weeks. Learning from Thomas and others like him, she began to understand that the humans were not interested in reclaiming their old empire or dominating the younger species of the galaxy. They were interested in something far more difficult and far more important. They wanted to teach their children how to grow. 100 years had passed since the revelation on Mars, and Kathira stood once again in the great hall of Olympus Mons. She was old now, far older than any Valorian had before humans shared the secret of extended lifespans with the galaxy. Her scales had faded from deep purple to a soft lavender, and she moved more slowly than she once had. But her mind remained sharp, and her heart remained full. The hall was crowded with young beings from 100 different worlds, gathered for the annual Assembly of Species, where representatives came together to discuss the future of galactic civilization. The old Concord had dissolved decades ago, replaced by something that did not have a formal name because no one could agree on what to call it. Some called it the family, others called it the garden, and still others simply called it the way, whatever its name. It was different from anything that had come before. The younger species no longer competed for dominance or fought over territory and resources. Instead, they cooperated, sharing knowledge and helping each other through difficult times. Because they had learned that this was what their parents wanted for them, the humans moved among them as teachers and advisors, never commanding but always guiding, offering wisdom when it was sought and stepping back when it was not. They had shared their technology freely, but they refused to do the work for their children. You must build it yourselves, they would say when asked for assistance. We can show you the principles, but your hands must do the labor. At first, this had frustrated the younger species. Why should they struggle to develop technologies that the humans could simply give them? But over time, they came to understand what Thomas had tried to explain to Kathira all those years ago on Europa. The struggle was the point when a species built something with their own hands. They understood it in ways that were impossible if it was simply handed to them. They felt the pride of accomplishment, the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of overcoming obstacles through their own effort. These feelings could not be given, only earned, and the younger species were earning them every day. The Valorians had developed a new form of art that combined their natural bioluminescence with holographic technology, creating displays of light and color that could move entire audiences to tears. The Rithani had discovered a method of communication that allowed beings to share emotions directly, breaking down barriers of language and culture that had divided species for millennia. Even the Mandari, who had been among the most warlike of all species, had transformed themselves into healers, using their natural resistance to disease to develop treatments that saved countless lives. Kathira watched the young delegates arriving in the Great Hall, and she remembered how different things had been when she first came to Earth back then. She had seen the humans as primitive and unimportant, a plateau species that had nothing to offer the greater galaxy. Now she understood that they had always been watching, waiting, hoping that their children would find their own way to greatness. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the hall, and the room fell silent, as it always did when she appeared. She was ancient beyond measure now, her body showing its years in ways that had not been visible a century ago. She had chosen to age, she explained once, because she wanted to show the younger species that there was no shame in growing old, that the passage of time was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. She moved slowly to the center of the hall, supported by two young humans who had not yet awakened to their full memories. And she looked out at the gathered delegates with eyes that still held all the love and wisdom of ages. "My children," she said, and her voice was softer now, but still carried to every corner of the room. "I have called this assembly because I have something important to tell you." She paused, and Kathira felt a sudden fear grip her heart. In all the years she had known Dr. Chun, she had never seen the old woman look so tired. "I am going to sleep," Dr. Chun said. "Not the sleep of death, but the sleep of renewal. The same sleep that my people embraced 3 billion years ago when we chose to become young again." A murmur of distress ran through the assembly. "Do not be afraid," Dr. Chun said, raising her hand for silence. "This is not an ending but a beginning. Not a farewell but a promise." She smiled, and for a moment, Kathira could see the young woman she must have been billions of years ago, full of hope and wonder and determination. "We have been your parents," Dr. Chun said, "and it has been the greatest honor of our existence to watch you grow. But the time has come for you to become parents yourselves." She gestured toward the doors of the great hall, where a group of beings stood waiting. They were unlike anything Kathira had ever seen. New species from beyond the galaxy, young and confused and frightened. "The universe is vast," Dr. Chen said, "and there are countless worlds where life is just beginning to emerge. Countless species who will need guidance and protection as they take their first steps toward the stars." She looked at the gathered delegates, at the Valorians and Rithani and Mendari, and all the others who had once been rivals and were now family. "We gave you the gift of existence," she said, "and now it is time for you to pass that gift along, to become the parents we have been for you, to love and nurture and guide the generations that will come after." Kathira felt tears running down her scaled face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "You have surpassed everything we hoped you might become," Dr. Chun said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "And we are so proud of you, all of you, our beautiful children." She turned to look at the new beings standing in the doorway, the young species who would be the first of many. "Now," she said, and there was a challenge in her voice that had not been there before. "Show them what you have learned. Show them what you can become. Show them that the universe is full of wonder and beauty and love." She smiled one last time at the gathered assembly. "Show them what it means to be alive." Dr. Chang closed her eyes, and the humans throughout the hall began to glow with a soft golden light as they prepared for their long sleep. But before they faded completely, Dr. Chun opened her eyes and looked directly at Kathira. "Thank you," she said, "for listening when no one else would." And then she was gone, and the younger species stood alone in the great hall, looking at each other and at the new arrivals who waited to be welcomed. Tatir straightened her spine and walked toward the newcomers, remembering how frightened she had been when she first arrived on Earth all those years ago. "Welcome," she said, extending her forearms in the gesture of peace that she had learned from the humans. "You have come a long way, and you must have many questions." The largest of the newcomers, a being made of crystal and light, looked at her with uncertainty. "Who are you?" it asked. "Why have you brought us here?" Kathira smiled, and in that moment she felt the weight of all the generations that had come before her, all the love and sacrifice and hope that had led to this moment. "We are your family," she said, "and we have so much to teach you." She took the crystal being's hand and led it into the hall, where 100 species waited to welcome it home outside. The stars burned bright against the darkness, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, the humans slept and dreamed of the children they had left behind, and the children carried on, as children always do, building something new from the gifts they had been given, becoming more than they had ever imagined they could be. The universe was vast and full of wonder, and there was so much left to discover. This was not an ending. This was a beginning.